This is Down the Rabbit Hole, where we question the mysteries and nature of reality. I'm your host, Justin Perry.
These short and true glitch and reality stories will have you pondering the nature of reality. The Doppelganger. A woman named Emily was sitting in a coffee shop when she saw her friend walk in. She waved at her, but her friend didn't respond. When Emily got up to go talk to her friend, she realized that it was actually her friend's doppelganger who looked almost identical to her friend. The doppelganger seemed to be confused and disoriented, and then quickly made an exit. The time loop. A man named James was driving on a highway late at night when he suddenly felt like he was driving in a loop. He kept seeing the same landmarks and passing the same cars, as if he was stuck in a time loop. The experience lasted for several minutes before he suddenly snapped out of it. The missing time. A woman named Sarah was driving home from work when she suddenly realized that 2 hours had passed without her noticing. She couldn't remember what had happened during that time, and had no explanation for the missing time. The phantom phone call. A man named Tom received a phone call from his sister, who had died several years earlier. He heard her voice on the other end of the line, and she seemed to be talking to someone else. When he tried to talk to her, the phone got staticky and the call abruptly ended. The disappearing object. A woman named Rachel was cooking in her kitchen when she suddenly dropped a knife. She heard it hit the floor, but when she looked down, the knife had completely vanished. She searched the entire kitchen and even had a friend help her look, but they never found the knife. The time warp. A man named Mark was driving home from work when he suddenly found himself in his driveway, even though he had no memory of driving the last few miles. When he looked at the clock, he realized that only a few minutes had passed, even though it should have taken him at least 20 minutes to get home. The predictive dream. A woman named Laura had a dream that she was in a car accident and saw the license plate of the other car involved. And sure enough, a few days later, she was in a real car accident involving the same exact license plate that she had seen in her dream. The vanishing roommate. A woman named Sarah had a roommate who suddenly vanished without a trace. All of her belongings were still in the apartment, but she was nowhere to be found. No one else had seen her leave or heard from her since she disappeared. It's as if she stepped into another dimension. The disappearing house. A man named Tom was driving through his hometown when he suddenly realized that his childhood home was gone. He asked his family and friends about it, but no one else remembered the house ever existing. The mysterious figure. A woman named Emily was walking home from work when she saw a mysterious figure standing in the middle of the road. The figure was completely black and featureless and seemed to be staring directly at her. When she blinked, the figure vanished. The woman from a different dimension. A woman named Lisa was staying in a hotel room when she suddenly saw a translucent woman walk through the wall. She said it was as if the woman was occupying a different reality and didn't even notice her. The time displacement. A man named John was driving home from work when he suddenly found himself in a completely different town, even though he had no memory of how he got there. When he looked at the clock, he realized that several hours had passed. It was as if he teleported or something. The teleporting object. A woman named Kate was sitting in her living room when she saw her cat suddenly teleport from one side of the room to the other. The cat seemed confused and disoriented, as if it had just experienced something strange. Granny's message. A woman named Sarah received a text message from her deceased grandmother, who had passed away several months earlier. The message was short and simple, but it was enough to convince Sarah that her grandmother was trying to communicate with her from beyond the grave. The vanishing person. A woman named Emily was walking in a crowded street when she saw a man suddenly vanish into thin air. He was there one moment, and then he was gone, as if he switched dimensions. The disappearing friend. A woman named Jane had a friend who suddenly vanished without a trace. She tried calling and texting her, but never received a response. When she went to her friend's apartment, she found that it had been completely emptied out. The inexplicable sighting. A woman named Lily saw a strange object in the sky that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was a bright, glowing orb that moved in erratic patterns and disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The impossible memory. A man named David had a vivid memory of a conversation he had with his friend about a movie that hadn't been released yet. When he asked his friend about it, his friend had no memory of the conversation, and the movie had never been made. The disappearing street. A man named Tom was driving to a friend's house when he suddenly found that the street he was on had vanished. It was a long, straight road that he had driven on many times before, but now it seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Random time slip. A woman named Maria was walking in a park when she suddenly found herself transported back in time. She was surrounded by people in old-fashioned clothing and saw a horse-drawn carriage go by. When she blinked, she was back in the present day. The time warp. A man named George was driving on a highway when he suddenly felt like he was traveling through time. The scenery around him seemed to be moving in slow motion, and he felt like he was moving much faster than he should have been. Then suddenly, everything went back to normal. The missing time. A woman named Sarah woke up one morning with no memory of the previous day. She couldn't remember going to work or anything else that had happened. She had a full day's worth of emails and other messages on her phone, but no memory of ever sending them. The woman from the past. A man named Jack saw a translucent figure in his bedroom late at night. It was a woman in old-fashioned clothing who seemed to be searching for something. When Jack turned on the light, the figure vanished. Accidental time slip at the park. A woman named Jenny was walking in a park when she suddenly found herself transported to the future. She saw people in strange clothing using technology she had never seen before. When she blinked, she was suddenly back in the present day. A strange encounter. A man named Chris saw a strange figure in the woods late at night. It was completely black and featureless and seemed to be moving in a way that defied the laws of physics. It seemed to be floating. When Chris approached it, the figure vanished. The disappearing train. A man named Alex was waiting for a train. It showed up, then suddenly disappeared when it suddenly disappeared from the station. The train had been there one moment, and then it was gone. The next, the time slip. A man named John was driving to work when he suddenly found himself transported several hours into the future. He had no memory of how he got there or what had happened during that time, but he was eventually pushed back into the current moment. The man from another dimension. A woman named Emily saw a ghostly figure in her apartment late at night. It was a man she had never seen before, and he seemed to be looking for something. When Emily turned on the light, the figure vanished. The time loop. A man named Tom was walking down a street when he suddenly found himself passing the same landmarks and people over and over again. He was stuck in a time loop for several minutes before he suddenly snapped out of it. The teleporting object. A woman named Rachel was in her bedroom when she saw her lamp suddenly teleport from one side of the room to the other. She said it seemed to move on its own, as if it had a mind of its own, as if it had a mind of its own. A man named James was driving down a road he had never been on before when he suddenly saw a car crash in front of him. He pulled over to help, but when he got out of his car, he realized that the car that had just crashed was his own. He was completely alone on the road and couldn't explain how he had seen the accident from two different perspectives. A woman named Sarah was on a hike with her husband when they suddenly stumbled upon a building that wasn't on any map. They walked up to investigate, but as they got closer, the building disappeared right before their eyes. A man named Tom was walking down the street when he suddenly saw an exact double of himself walking towards him. The two Toms locked eyes for a moment with shock and astonishment before the other Tom slowly faded from this existence. A man named Mark was driving down a road in the countryside when he suddenly saw a horse and carriage coming towards him. He pulled over to let them pass, but as they went by, he realized that the people in the carriage were dressed in clothing from the 1800s. It was like a scene from the past. A woman named Rachel was walking through a park when she saw a man sitting on a bench with a newspaper. She walked past him, but when she turned around to look again, the man and the newspaper were completely gone. A woman named Laura was driving down a busy street when she suddenly saw her own car parked on the side of the road. Same license plates and everything. She couldn't believe her eyes. She pulled over to investigate, but when she got out of her car, the other car was gone, vanished without a trace. A man named Peter was watching a movie at home when he suddenly realized that he had seen the exact same scene before in a dream. He had dreamed about the scene several months earlier, but had never seen the movie before. He knew each scene, and it really freaked him out. A woman named Jessica was walking through a department store when she suddenly saw her own reflection in a mirror. But her reflection wasn't doing what she was doing. It was as if her reflection lagged for a few seconds and then snapped back to normal. A woman named Maria was sitting in a coffee shop when she suddenly saw a man walk through the wall and disappear. It happened so fast, and nobody else in the coffee shop seemed to notice. A man named Jack was hiking in the mountains when he suddenly found himself in a completely different part of the mountain range. He had no memory of how he got there and couldn't explain how it had happened. It was as if he teleported on accident. This concludes this week's episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Until we meet again, stay mysterious, my friends.